Hello and welcome to episode 70 of the HamCorp Training Manual. In this episode, we will start ramping up our power production and diversifying our generation methods. Specifically, we will cover nitrobenzene, vacuum nukes, and the production of high-octane gasoline. For your ease of use, the video has been divided into chapters. So, since the last episode, I have made a couple of large combustion engines. Just a few. This is all in the power building. This used to be just a pair of quads right here, but I decided to make 6 more quads. So I have 8 quads now, so 32 combustion engines. And each one is going to be able to do about, I think it's 6,144 EU per tick, and that adds up to being a little bit less than 24 amps of LUV, if you account for cable losses and transformer tax, basically. But now I'm having a small issue. It's going to resolve itself in like 10 minutes, but I'm going to use it as an excuse. I'm not producing lubricant fast enough. That's not exactly true. I think I am. I'm just out of lubricant right now because all of it has gone to fill up the buffers in the different LCEs. So I'm going to use this as an excuse to build probably my favorite multi in the game so far, the Big Barrel Brewery. I love this thing. It looks like a big barrel, which is in the name, I guess. But there's no quest about this. And it's kind of a niche thing. You don't really need a multi-block brewery, but I thought it would be fun to make just for the sake of making it. Oh yeah, there's my big barrel. So now we can talk about the next steps. Like I've mentioned before, I want to vastly increase our power capabilities. This was a good first step, but I don't want to stop here. Even though I'm totally full on power, I still want to be able to make more. So I held a poll in the HamCorp Discord, and in first place was nitrobenzene, so we're going to do that right now. In second place was the vacuum nuke, which I really wanted to skip, but I guess you're not going to let me get away with it. And in third place was HOG, as well as solar towers. So I'm going to start with nitrobenzene. Nitrobenzene is actually, we're pretty much almost done because we already make everything that goes into nitrobenzene, and all that needs to be done is to make an ExxonMobil chemical plant that makes nitrobenzene, and then we need to make some way to burn the nitrobenzene. You could do a large gas turbine, but at this stage I think I'm going to go for the extra large turbo gas turbine. Now for the chemical plant, because this is an HV recipe, but I have IV energy hatches, we can do up to 16 parallels, which I think is more than is possible with the chemical plant, so I'm just going to go for 8 parallels and call it a day. And for that, I need the tungsten steel pipe casings. Besides that, everything else is pretty straightforward. Need IV machine casings, IV energy hatch, the best coils you have. Yeah. Nice and fast too. 4,000 liters per second. And now to burn this, I want to make the extra large turbo gas turbine. This does need an LUV assembler, so I'm gonna have to do a quick detour and craft one of those. Besides that, the Xeron 100 should be pretty easy to make, I think. Does need an LUV fluid solidifier and an LUV alloy blast smelter to make the molten Xeron 100, but the dusts are pretty easy to get. That is definitely the most expensive part here. The turbine shafts are pretty easy. The rotor assemblies are a little expensive, but also pretty easy. And then there's also the reinforced gas turbine casing, also a little expensive, but also easy. To be honest, at this point I'm wondering if it's just possible for me to make LUV energy hatches, because it might be. I am gonna need an assembler or two, but that's fine. And I am also going to need the superconductor wire. You know what? Let's do that. Let's go straight for the LUV energy hatches. Now, everything else for the LUV energy hatch is pretty simple, except the ultra high power ICs. These need molten naquata, which I don't have. I don't have the whole naquata line done yet. So I'm just going to, for now, use this really bad recipe of just extracting nuggets, and the nuggets come from blasting naquata oxide mixture dust. I have a little bit to spare. I got this from an asteroid, if you remember, a while ago. I set up a multi-block miner on a naquata asteroid, and this is what we got from that. Now that we have these LUV energy hatches, I can make the Xeron 100. I guess I could have made it before with 2 IV hatches, but this is an excuse to upgrade a lot of machines around the base anyway. So once I have that, I can make the XL turbo gas turbine and get back on track. Big. Look at this thing. It does need 12 large turbines to operate, but that's fine. That should last a while because this isn't on all the time. The XL gas turbine is a very large multi. it basically acts as if it's 16 turbines, even though there's only 6 on each side, so 12. So yeah, pretty fast. I also made a 16 amp dynamo hatch because according to the math, we make about 6.5 amps of LUV with the setup using nitrobenzene. And there's no 8 amp dynamo hatch, so the closest one was 16, so I made that. This just leads straight to the supercapacitor with a 16 amp energy hatch, nothing else in between. And I have this set to turn on when the power signal turns on. This is the same signal that turns on this stack of large combustion engines. And also from the same signal, I have it set to import using a fluid regulator set to 64, or was it? No, it was 48. Yeah, 48 liters per tick of nitrobenzene. You do need to do both of these things. You don't want to put in too much nitrobenzene because then you're burning it for no reason. So you do need the regulator with the switch. And the machine doesn't turn on unless there is fuel. So you kind of need to have both things turn on at the same time. But cool, this makes a lot of power. Next up, we'll do the vacuum nuke. And I think I am going to put it in the same building as the fluid nuke because they're both kind of old school IC2 nukes in a sense. So yeah, let me go investigate how to do that and gather the materials. Now for the vacuum nuke, we're going to need a couple of things. Obviously, we're going to need a nuclear reactor and chambers. We're also going to need a vacuum freezer, and we want this to run at IV, but I'm going to use 2 EV energy hatches for reasons. We're also going to need, of course, fuel rods, which I'm making now, and also some coolant cells. I'm not sure which of these two I want to use just yet, but I guess we'll see in a minute. Besides that, we're going to need a tally box from Automagy, also a remote comparator, and a crystalline eye. I don't have the research for any of these, so I have to do that first. Well, you asked for it. Here is a vacuum nuke. I did not invent this. I think it deserves a video of its own, and that's exactly where I learned this from. So I'm going to link you to that video in the description. It's a video by the person who designed this, iSorcree, and he can do a much better job of explaining how this is set up than I can. Basically, the way it works is there's a bit of redstone logic, clearly, based on things like if there are enough fuel rods, if there is a lack of coolant cells, if the heat is getting too high in the reactor. There's also a manual override and things like that. And all of those determine whether or not the reactor chamber is allowed to run. Some minor differences in my design compared to iSorcree's design. I've added this needs maintenance cover to the vacuum freezer on the bottom face, and I've just connected that to the manual override. So if this vacuum freezer ever needs maintenance, it's the same as me coming here and flipping the switch, and that sends a signal to this transmitter which turns the reactor off. So if the vacuum freezer has issues, everything stops. I also have this battery buffer here to power the vacuum freezer. I have this being kind of the first thing that's powered by the reactor, just so that the vacuum freezer always has power. And then the cable goes down and is transformed up into LUV and is connected with the rest of the nuclear setup. I have 2 energy detector covers, one on this mini buffer and one on the main nuclear LSC over here. If either of them don't have enough power, it will send a signal here turning the reactor on. And besides that, everything else is exactly the same as his design. I used the 360K NAC coolant cells instead of the helium ones, just because, I don't know, no reason really. And this makes, what is it? Oh, it's off. I think it's like 43,000 EU per tick. That's about 21 amps of EV. So I have a 4x TPV alloy cable here because the aluminum ones are not big enough to carry 24 amps. So this gets transformed up to 6 amps of IV, which is transformed up again to 1.5 amps of LUV, approximately. I think it should be pretty straightforward to pretty rapidly expand this. Just have more reactors and vacuum freezers, just stack them vertically. I don't know if you need a new redstone circuit for each one. I haven't thought about that, but you might, because this remote comparator is tied to one reactor chamber. But overall, this is a lot cheaper of an investment than all of this. And it also has way fewer kind of breaking points. Like each of these needs maintenance, this needs maintenance. I need to make sure I have enough coolant. I need to make sure my distilled water doesn't run out. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff over here. Over here, it's just, does the vacuum freezer have power? Does it have maintenance issues? If it has power and no maintenance issues, you're good. That's kind of it. But yeah, cool. Vacuum nuke, done. Up next, HOG, high octane gasoline. This one is a little tricky because we need gasoline, which comes from naphtha, refinery gas, and some other stuff. You use way more naphtha than refinery gas, so we already have an excess of refinery gas, more so than naphtha, so I have to deal with that. On top of that, I need octane, and octane comes from hydrocracked light fuel. And if you remember, we don't have an excess of light fuel. We have an excess of actually everything else. So we have excess heavy fuel. It doesn't look like it right now, but given that this runs forever, we'll eventually have an excess of heavy fuel. And of course, we'll have an excess of refinery gas and naphtha as well. So what I want to do is I don't want to touch this light fuel. I want this to be dedicated to cetane boosted diesel, but the excess heavy fuel we get is not enough to keep our HOG going, not at any reasonable rate anyway. So what I'm going to do to supplement this instead is I'm going to start processing this heavy oil. And all this heavy oil I got from processing our oil sands. I had a ton of oil sands dust and oil sands ore. It was just sitting in storage because it's not processed the same as other ores. All you do is you centrifuge it and you get heavy oil. Heavy oil will give you more heavy fuel than light fuel, which is fine because we can always take this heavy fuel, hydrocrack it, and then distill it, and that gives us light fuel, as well as some naphtha. And then the light fuel we can hydrocrack and then distill again, and then we get our octane. Besides that, nitrous oxide is pretty straightforward, nitrogen plus oxygen. Toluene, you can make it from naphtha or light fuel or heavy fuel, but I'm not going to because I already make an infinite amount of toluene from the benzene stuff. So I'm just going to use that toluene. And you don't use a lot per tick, so I think I should be fine to just rely on that. Anti-knock agent, there are two ways to make this. One with butene and one with butane. And you can also make it directly using butene and ethanol, but I don't have an infinite source of ethanol yet, and also this is a lot more energy expensive. Not that it matters because you don't use much anti-knock, so overall this is a pretty small cost. But how I'm going to make my anti-knock agent is with butane and methanol. So I'm going to make this MTB reaction mixture, and this is made from butane and methanol. And if you notice, you get butane and methanol back. You don't get as much as you put in, so you do still need to provide both of these, but that should be pretty easy because butane comes from hydrocracked light fuel as well as hydrocracked heavy fuel, which, as I mentioned before, are things I'm going to have. And the methanol we can just craft. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of intermixing of steps, which is why I haven't drawn a flowchart, because I started to do that and it looked like a mess. So I'm just going to go backwards, step by step, starting at HOG, and then I'll make each of these, and then I'll go back another layer, and then I'll make the next set of requirements, and so on. I don't think this is going to be enough space. I might expand this vertically, like I'll go down a bit. I don't know, I haven't decided. We'll see. Are you ready for a signature HamCorp cursed wall share? Look at this monstrosity. It's a dangote, 2 oil crackers, another dangote, and 2 distillation towers. Disgusting. So I did manage to fit the entire HOG setup in the same building, and it's this section right here. Everything you can see on the screen, more or less, is part of HOG. And the problem with HOG is because there are so many convoluted ways to get from heavy fuel to light fuel to naphtha to gas, and to get octane out of it and butane and all of these other random fucking compounds, like, it's very hard to tell what my bottleneck is going to be, especially because I'm adapting an existing system, or I'm expanding on an existing system to do this. So at this point, I don't really know where my bottlenecks will be. So I've decided I'm just going to live with it, and I'm just going to deal with the bottlenecks as they come. For example, the very first bottleneck I have was refinery gas was backing up. So I've started sending that to this third dangote, which is distilling it, basically. You get some butane out of it, which is useful for HOG, but not a lot. And I basically just have a fluid level limiter set up, so if I have more than 30 million liters, I start distilling. And that seems to work pretty well. I imagine the next one is going to be naphtha, but I don't know. I'm not sure. I truly have no idea where the flaws are here. But this has been running for about 5 minutes, and I already have a decent amount of high-octane gasoline. I can tell you right now that my main bottleneck in this final step is octane, which makes sense because octane comes from distillation. I did draw out a flowchart. This is not representative of what I have at the moment. It is a flowchart where the numbers are tweaked so that one EV multi-block mixer is running at 100% uptime. Sourcing the oil for this is, I don't even know how I would do that. I don't even know how much oil I would need, but I know that it's far more than I can produce. The amount of HOG you get from this is about 8 million EU per tick worth of HOG, which is a lot of HOG. Of course, that is not including the cost of making the HOG, and it's also not including the EU that you can get from burning any byproducts. Again, that is not the setup I have here, but I'm considering just building a big factory somewhere and just committing to that and trying to get that going. But that's obviously not going to happen for a while, because I don't need 8 million EU per tick. That's a little overkill, but I may at some point in the future. If you're interested in that flowchart, it's available on the Discord, or you can, take a screenshot. But I'm going to keep that in my pocket, and I may come back to that in the future. Thank you for watching this episode of the HamCorp Training Manual. In the next episode, we will set up the machinery required to burn HOG, as well as set up some solar towers. If our power needs are not yet met, we will also look at the deep earth heating pump and liquid fluoride thorium reactor, but it's more likely that we already have a power surplus. We will investigate the use of Tesla towers to transport power around the base more easily. See you next time.